Good Shabbos. This week's portion is Parshas Kiseitze, and it has within it many different types of laws. Some of these laws give us the ability to show where the difference lies between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. I'm going to focus on two examples. One is in the middle of the portion, and it tells us not to take interest from our neighbor. And it's a very simple law. Do not take interest. You could loan money and loan money for free. The problem, of course, comes up in a modern society where we're not an agricultural society anymore, and lending money and investing money is really how all of our economy works. And if we wouldn't be able to take interest, we'd really have a hard time making the economy work. So what do the rabbis do? The rabbis said many, many years ago already that we could have a heter iska, which means there's an allowance made for what seems to be taking interest by changing it from taking interest to making it an investment. So when I lend you $100,000 for your mortgage on your house, I'm not giving you a loan, but rather I'm an investor in the house, and then we make up between us how much profit I could take, and there's ways to make it so it works very similar to a mortgage. So when someone's looking at this, they say, well, it's just a game that we're playing, and we're trying to avoid that which the Torah says. And there's some truth in that. But I think what's important is that we have to understand what the Torah was trying to do, the spirit of the law, and then there's the letter of the law. So we have a rule which was in last week's portion already. We can't add or subtract from those commandments in the Torah. So we can't change the letter of the law, but we still have to understand what the spirit is. And here it's quite obvious. The Torah is trying to say that although just like if you rent out your car or your cow, you should be able to rent it for a certain price, when you rent out your money, you shouldn't treat it in the same way. It's really saying that even though it makes perfect sense to charge interest or rent for your money, you shouldn't do that. You should do an act of kindness. The spirit of the law is to say to be kind to your fellow neighbor. And that's fine. The problem is that what happens if you create such laws and take it 100% in a strict fashion, no one will lend money for a mortgage. If you come to me and say, I need $100 to pay my heating bill and I'll pay you back next month, I'll do that. But if you ask me for $100,000, I say, no, I can't afford to have my capital just sit there and not making any money. So we make an allowance. And the idea is that the spirit of the law is to be kind and to help someone in need. And the letter of the law is never to take interest. So we say, listen, we have to change the reality on the ground, but we have to still keep the spirit of the law. How do you keep the spirit of the law? So I think it's very obvious. When someone comes to you and says, can you lend me $100 to pay my heating bill? Don't write up a heter iska. Don't make it an investment in his heating situation in his house, but rather do the fellow a favor. So we know the Torah wants us to be kind where it makes sense to be kind and it doesn't infringe on our ability to make an income or to put too much risk on that which we own, the capital that we own. So the rabbis were, I think, quite adept at saying, okay, let's have a workaround on the letter of the law. We don't want to change the law, but make sure we keep the spirit of the law. Now, the rabbis didn't say you should therefore keep the spirit of the law in those situations, but I think it's obvious that that's what we're supposed to do. So in this case, we end up with leniency in order to keep the letter of the law and still retain the spirit of the law, but making sure we act with kindness in many different avenues in our life. Now I want to take an example from the very beginning of the portion, which is quite striking. It says that when you go out to war and a soldier sees a woman, an Ashes Yafas, basically a beautiful woman that he wants to take for himself. So the Torah says you could take her, and there's a disagreement in the Talmud whether you're allowed to have relations with her right away or not. Either way, if it's relations right away, you still have to wait then afterwards, and you let her you let her hair grow, and you different things that you do, and you certainly cannot continue to live with her until you really have a time to come back and to understand what you're doing and seeing whether you still have that desire that you're going to take advantage of this woman. And again, in modern times, this sounds horrific. There's no excuse at all, basically, for rape in time of war, and certainly not to take a hostage woman back for your wife. But let's be honest, when you read the Torah, that's what it says. So the commentaries say, Dibra Torah Keneged Yetzer Hara. The Torah is talking about trying to understand the inclination that human beings have, that men in time of war have. And the Torah understood that if it said this is totally forbidden, people wouldn't listen. Now that's in that time. People wouldn't listen. So it says, okay, you could do it, but do it under these conditions, which make it much less problematic. It doesn't take away the problem completely, but it at least alleviates the situation and make sure that this is not something which is just men going around or taking advantage and raping women in the battlefield. But how do we look at that today? And obviously, international law, Israeli law, common human decency says there's no such thing as rape at all. So what we do is we have the letter of the law, but we understand the spirit of the law. The spirit of the law is to make sure that you don't get carried away. So now, when the expectation is that there's no such thing as rape, we understand that we're not going to allow it at all. Because the spirit of the law is to take it beyond what the norm is. And we have to take, just like it's saying beyond the norm, that be kind when you don't have to be kind from the letter of the law, and trying to create a spirit of kindness. Here, the Torah is allowing something, but we realize that we're able in our context, in our times, to be stricter. Then we should be stricter, because that's I believe, the spirit of the law. So there's some flexibility that the rabbis have. Now, the rabbis didn't actually make any type of decree in Talmudic times about this particular law, but I think it's obvious to our modern sensibility that that's what the spirit is. And therefore, we have to take that into account. And there's always this tension between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. It's very easy to say that, oh, when we're speaking ill about somebody else, this is not really technically lashon hara, evil talk about someone, because there's so many conditions that might have to be met that weren't met. We have to sometimes just sit back and use our common sense and say, is this what the Torah wants from us? Is this what God wants from us? Is this what we want from ourselves? Is this the morality that we're going to live with? And we have to ask ourselves that question, whether it's in regard to the Eishes Yifas Torah, the women, or whether it's in regard to interest, whether it's in regard to lashon hara, or a myriad amount of other laws. We have to realize that we should not just be technically keeping the law, but we have to have the spirit of law. Sometimes that allows for certain leniencies, and I believe sometimes it makes us be a little bit stricter. But in general, we have to be aware of really what's guiding us, not to focus on the law. Just like in secular law, you can get away with a lot of things. The question is that what's correct? Is that what's ethical? Is that what you would like somebody else to do to you, to take advantage of you? And therefore, we have to realize that living by the spirit of the law is really what the Torah is trying to do. The Torah is trying to make us into better human beings. And hopefully we can learn that from this portion and become better human beings, especially now in the month of El leading up to Rosh Hashanah. Good Shabbos.